The Deputy Director for Disability Rights, this is Human Rights Watch, Dr. Elizabeth Kamundia, says that the non-payment of grants has a much deeper impact on people's dignity.
Their dignity is impaired. I think sometimes we forget when we are talking about these sorts of grants, we are talking about people's livelihoods, we are talking about access to food, we are talking about access to care and support. And so once they don't receive this grant, their dignity is what is at risk indeed.
For more on this, we're joined by Member of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Social Development, Mari Elizabeth Sukers, who is also with the ACDP, the African Christian Democratic Party. A very good evening to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your time. So today we had an explanation, if you will, of some kind from the Social Development Minister and Communications Minister. Are you convinced by the reasons or the explanation that they've given for why this has been such a frustrating time for grant beneficiaries?
I think what I need to say is unacceptable. The reasons, to give reasons after 2 weeks of people experiencing hardships, to access money and going into loans with loan sharks, with family members, people sleeping and walking and taking taxis to get to payment points, it's unacceptable. The issues at Postbank and the payment issues goes deeper than that. We have systemic failures in government that is impacting the poor and the vulnerable.
With that in mind, then, who should be held responsible for the many problems which you now describe, where you've got grant beneficiaries who've had to approach loan sharks, perhaps just to buy food, to be able to get to town for some of these people, just to go try again to see if the money's in their accounts. Others needed to get their grandchildren to school, etc. Who takes responsibility for that suffering?
The executive needs to take responsibility ultimately.
How do we do that? How do we get the executive to take responsibility and to be held accountable?
And that is the big question, because what we have seen now in the last 10 years is that we have inquiries. I just heard the NGOs calling for that. But we have no people suffering no consequences, you know. And the buck ultimately stops with the executive. It is for them. They've signed performance management agreements with the president. It is for them to answer and to hold responsible the supply line in terms of management that is responsible for procurement, for contract management, because all of this goes back to that. The issues at Postbank is procurement related, contract management related, and it seems as if in the state, we can now emphatically state the state has no capability to strategically manage anything.
Mm-hmm. So, given the issues around the Postbank, I mean, today we got news that the board has resigned. The board says it's leaving because basically it cannot work with Minister Mondli Gungubele. It's accusing him of all sorts of things, the creation of a hostile environment, etc. Well, he says this board is resigning because there were questions raised about potentially irregular contracts. Would the grant system work better if the Postbank was removed from the equation?
You know, that's not a question I can answer. My answer directly. I think what I have seen in the last 2 years with the service delivery issues, all of that, is an incapable state. What you literally need is for the public service to be totally transformed. And it starts with people being held accountable. We have an accountability problem. And we have a capacity problem. We have the wrong people in the wrong jobs, and we have people earning massive salaries that does not have the capability to manage a fish in a fish pond. That is the problem that we're having. So it goes right back to cadre deployment, and many of the problems we have are strategic in nature, and we have people, it's a capacity problem.
Should then the political pressure and push for accountability, push for change, go all the way to President Ramaphosa's doorstep? What should he be doing? Because ultimately, the poor in this country have been made a promise by the government which he leads. And if many of them are having to go hungry at a time when they were waiting for a payment through the grant system, the head of state should say something or do something.
Exactly. I think you've just nailed it. You've nailed it. When you look at the scale of the problem, the impact of the problem, we have about 6.4 million people that make use of the Postbank system. You have 500,000 reversals that they needed to correct because people couldn't access the money. So it is, in terms of impact, and when you look at the poverty levels, this department, which this portfolio committee that I'm sitting on is responsible for, knows exactly the depth of poverty in our community. So when you look at that, then yes, the president of our country that says, and the governing party that says they pro-poor needs to not only take accountability, they need to stand before the nation. And it's the president that should do that, especially when you think what the impact is on the most vulnerable.
Is an inquiry then, as was being suggested by Lisa Vetten earlier, the best way to ensure that happens?
I must tell you that I come from a business background. I'm so sick and tired of hearing of inquiries that takes a lot of taxpayers' money and nobody's held responsible. Yes, inquiries is needed, but we know what the problems are. The problems are capacity problems. You need to fire people. When are we firing people in the public service and say, listen, we cannot afford to have you? You must know the amount of money government in terms of the budgets that they are managing. Imagine that. And if you're in a private business, if you would still be in an executive position, if your operations are falling flat. It's an accountability problem and people need to be fired.
And who exactly should be fired? Who needs to be fired in this instance?
Let the president stand in front of the nation and tell us exactly where the problems lies. I see that the board members have said the minister in the presidency, the problems that they have with him. The cultural issues that are highlighted in terms of an organization, I'm just going to break it down to an organization. Most of the time is because we are all the time in government in crisis management, right? We never get to the bottom of things, and we never, because of the political influencing the operations, the recruitment and placement, you have the issue that we are like a hamster wheel. It goes like in circles, right? So the minister himself and the president needs to, the promise they made the nation and the performance management contracts that were signed with the minister, all of those people at the executive level need to tell us who is responsible ultimately for the procurement, what they have done for that with those people that has not managed the procurement contracts correctly. They need to tell us what they are going to do, and it starts at the top.
Lastly, what do you make of the suggestion by the Democratic Alliance during the appearance yesterday by the Social Development Minister in Parliament that perhaps bringing in private banks to disperse grants, is the best way to go about this going ahead?
At this point, yes. The state has no capability to do it. The state has no capability to do it. If you look at the problems that we're having and the opportunities, there's huge opportunity here. If the president is serious about economic development, especially among the youth, you have systemic problems, there's the opportunity now. Look at what capacity is there for you to actually plan out all the ideals of entrepreneurial development and see if you cannot use that to answer to a problem that as a state you cannot solve.
Can a deal with private banks, though, be done in a cost-effective manner, especially when you consider that Treasury at the moment is beating the drum of austerity, and even Labour's up in arms saying basically this means there'll be such serious cuts that even the poorest of the poor will ultimately be affected?
There's one word for government, and it is called innovation. We need to start being innovative. We don't have a money problem. We have a leadership problem. And there is nothing that the South African taxpayer has not done. They pay their taxes and they make the money available for the poor to be looked after by the state. The state is incapable. It means that now we need change, and you need to look at innovation. How do we respond to the massive need for the poor to get their money in a way that does not affect them as negatively as it did in the 2 weeks past? And if it means that for a short period you need to rely on private banks, then certainly you should. But in the long term, it's not an answer. The answer is innovation and looking at more community-based interventions in terms of entrepreneurship and how we process monies. It's innovation. I haven't looked into it, but I can looked into what the technical answer is. But I say, one, innovation, fire people, and then we will start seeing change, I believe.
Marie Elizabeth Sukers with the ACDP in Parliament, member of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development. Good to have your time, ma'am. Thank you.